Ko Rax lounged in his ergonomic hover chair aboard the galactic research station Epsilon, sipping his premium nutrient shake through a crystalline straw. His research team surrounded him, all fixated on the massive holographic display showing the surface of Nexus 7, arguably the most lethal planet in the known universe. Anyone else bored out of their minds, Captain Zena drawled, her 4 eyes blinking in synchronized annoyance. 3 weeks of watching acid rain dissolve rocks. Simply thrilling. Patience, Captain Dr. Plix responded, adjusting his atmospheric sensors. This is vital xenobiological research. A blaring alarm cut through the comfortable monotony of their observation deck. Red warning lights flashed as something entered Nexus 7's atmosphere at precisely the wrong angle. What in the name of the 3 moons is that? Vex scrambled to enhance the image, nearly knocking over his precious collection of rare minerals. The object tumbled through the toxic clouds, trailing smoke and debris. As it emerged from the acidic mist, the unmistakable shape of a small spacecraft became clear, specifically a human escape pod. "Oh no," Nari whispered, all 3 of her hands covering her mouth. "That poor creature is going to die." Ko Rax leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "Is that a human? On Nexus 7? Betting pool." "Betting pool," Quill shouted, bouncing excitedly on his anti-gravity cushion. "I say it dies in the first 10 minutes. 20 credits on death by acid rain," Captain Zena called out, already pulling up the digital betting interface. 30 on atmospheric poisoning, Dr. Plix added with scientific certainty. The toxicity levels alone. The escape pod hit the ground with what should have been a catastrophic impact. Instead, it bounced 3 times, like a stone skipping across water, before coming to rest in a relatively flat area between 2 acid lakes. Complete silence fell over the observation deck. That Ko Rax blinked rapidly. That should not have been possible. The pod's hatch burst open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A figure emerged, stretched casually, and took a deep breath of the lethal atmosphere. "Is it?" Yawning, Nari asked incredulously. The human, according to their quick scan, one Morgan Blake pulled out some kind of primitive data device and began speaking into it. "Day 1 on whatever this lovely planet is called." Morgan's voice came through their monitors, sounding remarkably cheerful. "Crash landing successful. Weather's a bit acidic, but nothing a good raincoat won't fix. Now, let's see about building a shelter before those interesting-looking predators in the distance decide to introduce themselves." Captain Zena stared at her betting interface, then at the human casually strolling through terrain that could melt standard spacecraft hulls. "I think," she said slowly, "we might need to adjust our survival estimates." Ko Rax couldn't take his eyes off the scene. "Begin recording," he commanded. "Document everything. I have a feeling we're about to witness something extraordinary." Dr. Plix grumbled, already calculating his potential betting losses. "Or extraordinarily stupid. Same thing with humans, isn't it?" Ko Rax grinned, settling in for what promised to be the most entertaining research session of his career. Ko Rax frantically adjusted the observation cameras, trying to capture every impossible moment of what should have been a tragic space disaster, but was quickly turning into a masterclass in human audacity. "Run that trajectory calculation again," he demanded, watching Morgan Blake's escape pod perform what looked suspiciously like a deliberate spin through Nexus 7's upper atmosphere. "Already did," Vex reported, his tentacles flying over the holographic controls. "According to every physics model we have, that human should be a spherical cloud of superheated plasma right now." The escape pod corkscrewed through another layer of acidic clouds, somehow using the planet's lethal atmosphere like a cosmic brake pad. Warning indicators screamed across their monitors as their sensors detected the pod's hull literally surfing the magnetic field lines. "Are they?" Captain Zena squinted at the readouts. "Are they whistling?" Indeed, through the pod's internal communications, they could hear Morgan Blake casually whistling an upbeat tune while manually adjusting the pod's stabilizers with one hand and what appeared to be eating a sandwich with the other. Impossible. Dr. Plix slammed all 4 appendages on his console. The G-forces alone should have turned their organs into soup. "Well," Ko Rax mused, "human organs are surprisingly resistant to becoming soup. Remember that incident on Station Beta?" "Please don't remind me," Nari groaned. "I just got the stains out of my ceremonial robes." The pod entered its final descent phase, and the entire observation team held their breath except for Quill, who was already calculating new betting odds. The human's voice crackled through their speakers, still impossibly calm. Note to self: next time pack more snacks in the emergency kit. These standard-issue protein bars taste like cardboard, though I suppose that's better than whatever that purple thing with teeth is down there. Hello, gorgeous. Purple thing with... Oh no, Vex zoomed in on the landing zone. That's a Nexian Deathraver, one of the deadliest predators in this sector. Morgan's pod shot past the creature, close enough to ruffle its toxic spines. The Deathraver, apex predator of a death world, took one look at the whistling human's approach and decided to seek easier prey. Smart beast, Captain Zena muttered. The final impact sequence defied every known law of physics. The pod bounced, rolled, and somehow managed to land upright in what could generously be called a parking position. The hatch hadn't even finished opening before Morgan Blake hopped out, stretching like someone who'd just finished a pleasant nap rather than a death-defying plunge through a toxic atmosphere. Ground's a bit spongy, Morgan observed, jumping up and down on terrain that could dissolve standard military boots. Good foundation for a basement, though. Might need to adjust for the acid content, but nothing a little limestone won't fix. Korax's research team stared at their monitors in stunned silence. Dr. Plix was the first to recover, his scientific curiosity overwhelming his disbelief. They're going to build a basement? Here? Now. Fascinating. Korax leaned forward, activating additional recording devices. Notice how they're already planning long-term structures. The human doesn't just want to survive, they want to renovate. But the atmospheric pressure alone, Nari started, is apparently just another design challenge, Captain Zena interrupted, watching Morgan casually set up what looked like primitive atmospheric sensors using parts salvaged from the pod. I'm starting to think we might need to revise our entire classification system for death worlds. Morgan's voice continued to narrate, now discussing the possibilities of using local minerals for basic construction. These rocks have an interesting crystalline structure. Bet they'd make fantastic countertops once treated properly. Oh, and look at that sunset. The acid clouds really bring out the purple in those radiation storms. Korax turned to his team, his expression serious despite the growing excitement in his voice. My fellow researchers, I believe we're about to witness something unprecedented. This isn't just a survival situation. We're watching the first episode of what might be the greatest renovation show in galactic history. Should we intervene? Quill asked, still updating his betting odds. Absolutely not, Korax replied, settling back into his hover chair with a fresh nutrient shake. But do start taking notes. Something tells me the galactic scientific community is going to have a lot of questions about this one. Let's see what we've got to work with here. Morgan announced, pulling out a handheld scanner that looked suspiciously like a modified kitchen thermometer. Air quality spicy, ground acidity zesty, local wildlife enthusiastically carnivorous. Perfect place for a summer home. In the observation station, Dr. Plix clutched his datapad so hard it cracked. Did they just describe Class 12 corrosive atmosphere as spicy? Temperatures a bit high, Morgan continued, fanning themselves with a chunk of escape pod debris. Nothing a good old-fashioned solar chimney won't fix. And look at all this wonderful building material just lying around. The human proceeded to gather chunks of crystallized acid rock, which even the native predators avoided due to its caustic properties. Korax watched in fascination as Morgan stacked them like children's building blocks. Are they humming? Nari asked, adjusting the audio feed. I believe, Captain Zena said slowly, that's an ancient human song called Whistle While You Work. Morgan paused their construction to examine a nearby pond of what the research team knew to be highly contaminated water. The human pulled out a simple filtration device, dipped it in, and to the horror of every alien watching, took a long drink. No, the entire research team shouted in unison. Ah, refreshing. Morgan wiped their mouth. Bit tangy, but nothing my trusty water filter can't handle. Reminds me of that artisanal mineral water they sell back on Earth. You know, the really expensive stuff. Quick, calculate time until total organ failure, Dr. Plix demanded, his appendages flying over the medical scanners. Vex studied the readings. According to these scans, they just metabolized it. Their stomach acid actually neutralized the contamination. Impossible, Dr. Plix screeched. Their biochemistry would have to be metal as fuck, Captain Zena suggested, using a human phrase she'd picked up. As night approached, bringing with it a temperature drop of nearly 200 degrees, Morgan seemed to take it all in stride. They'd constructed a shelter using the acid rocks, reinforced with salvaged pod materials, and lined with some kind of enzyme-producing moss they'd found growing in the shadows. "Look at this fantastic insulation," Morgan patted the moss. "And it glows in the dark. Talk about mood lighting." The shelter, despite looking like something a child might draw, somehow withstood the nightly acid rain. Morgan sat in the entrance, roasting what appeared to be local vegetation over a makeshift fire. "Should we tell them that plant is poisonous?" Quill asked nervously. "Would it matter?" Ko Rax replied, watching Morgan season the toxic flora with salvaged emergency rations. "I'm beginning to think their digestive system is actually an advanced chemical processing plant." "Everyone back home is going to love this," Morgan chatted happily into their recording device, taking a big bite of the lethal vegetation. "Sure beats those survival shows where they rough it in perfectly habitable forests. Now this is real estate with character." A massive predator, drawn by the fire's light, approached the shelter. Morgan casually tossed it a piece of their dinner. The beast sniffed it, immediately turned green, and slunk away into the darkness. "Aw, looks like the local wildlife isn't ready for my cooking," Morgan chuckled. "Their loss." Ko Rax made a note in his research log. Day 1 human displays unprecedented ability to weaponize cooking. Possible defense mechanism. As the night grew darker and colder, Morgan wrapped themselves in a blanket made from heat-resistant pod lining and began planning the next day's construction. Tomorrow's agenda: build a proper bathroom. Can't live in paradise without indoor plumbing. Though these acid geysers might make for an interesting bidet situation. "I don't know what a bidet is," Captain Zena said, "but I'm terrified to find out." Dr. Plix had given up on his medical scans and was now drinking something considerably stronger than a nutrient shake. This goes against everything we know about survival on Deathworlds. "No," Ko Rax corrected, watching Morgan doze off while casually tossing toxic pebbles at approaching predators. "This goes against everything we thought we knew. And personally, I can't wait to see what they do tomorrow." 10 credits says they try to domesticate one of those acid-spitting worms, Quill offered. 20 says they succeed, Captain Zena countered. Neither of them noticed Morgan already sketching plans for what looked suspiciously like a worm farm. By day 3, Morgan Blake had turned their survival situation into what they kept calling a fun home renovation project, much to the growing bewilderment of the alien observation team. Rise and shine, future mansion. Morgan stepped out of their basic shelter, wearing a makeshift hard hat fashioned from pod debris. Today's agenda: adding a second story. Because why survive when you can thrive? Ko Rax watched in fascination as the human began laying out tools salvaged from the crash. Are they using a broken navigation computer as a level? Technically speaking, Vex noted, it's still the most accurate leveling device on this planet, though I'm not sure why they drew a smiley face on it. Morgan had developed an interesting technique for handling the acid rocks, using the pod's emergency thermal blanket as makeshift gloves. They'd discovered that by singing at specific frequencies, what they called good old-fashioned show tunes, they could actually detect structural weaknesses in the stones. "When you wish upon a star," Morgan belted out, tapping rocks with a makeshift hammer. "Makes no difference how caustic you are. Their vocal vibrations are actually causing a molecular realignment in the crystal structure," Dr. Plix muttered, staring at his readings in disbelief. "They're stabilizing highly volatile compounds through musical theater." The shelter was rapidly becoming more complex. Morgan had somehow created a primitive but effective air filtration system using layers of the glowing moss, crushed minerals, and what they swore was the same basic principle as my grandmother's coffee maker. "Look at this brilliant ventilation," Morgan proudly showed off their work to their recording device. "The acid rain collects here, runs through these crystal channels, gets filtered by our friendly glowing moss, and boom, fresh water and mood lighting in one. I'm thinking of calling it organic smart home technology." Captain Zena leaned closer to her screen. "Are they using a Deathraver's shed spine as a support beam?" "Yes," Ko Rax confirmed. "And apparently they've named it Bob." The viewing numbers for their research feed had skyrocketed. Other alien species across the galaxy had tuned in to watch what was quickly becoming the most bizarre construction show in history. "And here's where the sunroom will go," Morgan explained, marking out a space that happened to be directly in the path of regular acid storms. "Nothing beats reading a good book while watching the local weather try to dissolve your windows." Speaking of which, the human proceeded to demonstrate their latest invention: transparently crystallized acid rock, melted down and reformed into crude but effective windows. The process should have been impossible without advanced technology, but Morgan managed it with the escape pod's emergency heater and what they claimed was a trick I learned in chemistry class while making rock candy. "They're literally making acid-proof windows out of acid," Nari whispered, "using candy-making techniques." "The comments section is going crazy," Quill reported, monitoring the galactic feed. "We've got viewers from 17 different sectors betting on what room they'll add next. The Hive Mind Collective from Sector 7 is particularly invested in the bathroom renovation." Morgan had moved on to installing what they called a nice water feature, a controlled flow of filtered acid rain that cascaded down crystallized rocks into a collection pool. Somehow they'd managed to get the toxic but beautiful local flora to grow along its edges. "Really ties the room together, don't you think?" Morgan asked a passing predator, which had stopped trying to eat them and now just looked confused. "I'm thinking of adding some underwater lighting. Maybe get some of those glowworms in here. Create a real conversation piece." Dr. Plix had long since abandoned his scientific objectivity and was now simply writing why repeatedly in his research notes. By sunset, the shelter had acquired a second floor, complete with a balcony made from reinforced pod panels and decorated with potted acid-resistant plants. Morgan had even created a primitive elevator system using counterweights and salvaged mechanical parts. "Tomorrow's project hot tub," Morgan announced cheerfully. "These geothermal acid vents are practically begging to be converted into a spa feature. Just need to adjust the pH level from instantly lethal to pleasantly tingly." "They're going to die," Dr. Plix stated flatly. "You've been saying that for 3 days," Captain Zena reminded him. "And yet somehow they've built better accommodation than my first apartment." Ko Rax studied the structure with growing appreciation. Despite its seemingly random construction methods, every part served multiple purposes. The acid crystal windows didn't just provide views, they helped regulate temperature. The weird angles of the walls actually helped deflect the strongest acid winds. Even the decorative elements doubled as emergency tools or backup water filters. "This isn't just survival," he realized. "This is adaptation at its finest. They're not fighting the environment, they're working with it." "By turning it into a luxury resort?" Nari asked incredulously. Exactly, Morgan's voice carried through their speakers, as if answering. "Why should nearly dying on a hostile planet mean you can't have a nice soaking tub? Now, who wants to help me design a rooftop garden? I'm thinking we could grow some of those lovely exploding fruit trees. Really add some excitement to breakfast." The observation team watched as their test subject, who should have died 72 hours ago, continued humming and planning home improvements. Morgan had even set up a welcome mat made from shed predator scales, with home sweet potentially lethal home carefully woven into it. "You know what the scariest part is?" Captain Zena mused, watching Morgan sketch plans for what appeared to be a combination greenhouse and defensive bunker. "What?" Ko Rax asked. "I'm actually starting to think it looks cozy." Morgan's voice drifted through their speakers one last time before night fell. "Note to self-check if any local real estate agents survive long enough to list property here. I smell a hot market opportunity. Oh, would you look at that beautiful specimen?" Morgan exclaimed, watching a 12-foot Nexian deathraver stalk toward their newly constructed porch. "Such lovely acid-dripping fangs. Really brings out the whole Deathworld aesthetic." Ko Rax and his team watched in horror as their human subject grabbed what appeared to be a makeshift spray bottle filled with filtered water. No, bad kitty," Morgan scolded, spritzing the apex predator directly in its 4 eyes. "We talked about this. No hunting during construction hours." The Deathraver, a creature known for dissolving entire research teams in seconds, backed away with what could only be described as an embarrassed hiss. "Did they just?" Captain Zena blinked all 4 eyes repeatedly. "Did they just treat a Class 12 predator like a misbehaving house pet?" The really concerning part, Vex noted, is that it worked. Morgan had developed an unusual relationship with the local wildlife. Rather than running from the predators, they'd started naming them and assigning them tasks. The Deathraver, now dubbed Mr. Whiskers, had somehow been recruited as an impromptu security system. Good boy Morgan tossed the creature a piece of processed emergency ration. Keep those acid worms away from my foundation, and there's more where that came from. Dr. Plix frantically updated his research notes. Subject appears to be establishing a primitive symbiotic relationship with native fauna through bribery and positive reinforcement. The situation got even more bizarre when a swarm of flying razor wasps attacked the shelter. Instead of seeking cover, Morgan grabbed a makeshift tennis racket crafted from pod debris and emergency netting. 40 love, they shouted, swatting acid-filled wasps into the mouth of an approaching ground crawler. See? Everyone wins. You get a snack, they pointed to the ground crawler, and you guys learn about personal space. This to the retreating wasp swarm. Their combat strategy appears to be Korax paused, searching for the right words, playing games. And winning, Captain Zena added, watching Morgan use a reflective panel to redirect a predator's acid spit back at its own hunting pack. Though I'm not sure if that counts as fighting or just weaponized inconvenience. The true test came when the planet's actual apex predator arrived, a massive crystalline creature locals called the World Render. It could shatter mountains with its roar alone. Morgan's reaction? Now that's what I call a conversation starter. They pulled out their recording device. Day 5 made a new friend. Bit noisy, seems hangry. Nothing a good meal won't fix. The entire observation team held their breath as Morgan approached the World Render with what appeared to be a large container of their specially processed food, the same stuff that had sent other predators running. Who's a hungry crystal baby? You are. Yes, you are, Morgan cooed, actually reaching up to scratch under the monster's crystalline jaw. Those acid glands look inflamed. No wonder you're cranky. There. Going to die, Dr. Plix whispered, not for the first time. Instead, the World Render, terror of Nexus 7, melted into what could only be described as a purring puddle of contentment as Morgan treated its acid glands with a homemade neutralizing solution. There you go, big fella. I think I'll call you Sparkles. Want to help me with some landscaping? Those crystal horns would make quick work of that hill I've been meaning to level. Korax watched in stunned silence as the human proceeded to direct the galaxy's most feared predator like a construction vehicle, using hand signals and treats to reshape the terrain around their shelter. Update classification, he managed to say. Humans are not prey species. Humans are not predator species. Humans are, he struggled to find the right words. Reality-bending chaos entities who turn death worlds into petting zoos, Captain Zena suggested. Close enough, Korax agreed, watching Morgan teach the World Render to play fetch with acid-proof balls made from crystallized rock. By day's end, Morgan had essentially assembled a complete security system consisting entirely of reformed local predators. The observation team could only watch as their subjects settled into their porch swing, surrounded by supposedly deadly creatures, all now domesticated through what Morgan called basic positive reinforcement and lots of belly rubs. Note to self, Morgan's voice came through their speakers one final time. Must remember to build bigger porch. Sparkles gets grumpy when he can't join Storytime. Day 30 dawned like any other on Nexus 7, with acid rain pattering against Morgan's crystalline windows and Mr. Whiskers the Deathraver chasing acid worms off the newly installed deck. The only difference was the massive rescue ship descending from orbit. Attention, crash survivor, boomed a voice from the ship's speakers. We're here to save you from this deadly environment. Morgan looked up from where they were teaching Sparkles the World Render how to roll over, a slightly annoyed expression on their face. Oh, right. The rescue team. I completely forgot about that. Korax and his research team watched in fascination as the rescue ship attempted to land in Morgan's carefully landscaped front yard. No, 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 Morgan waved their arms frantically. Not on my acid-resistant flower beds. Do you know how long it took to breed those? Land over there, next to the meditation pool. The rescue team emerged in full hazmat suits, weapons drawn, ready to fight off deadly predators. Instead, they found Morgan hosting what appeared to be afternoon tea on their porch, surrounded by the planet's most lethal creatures, all wearing crude but surprisingly fashionable accessories. Would you like some locally sourced mineral tea? Morgan offered. The acid content gives it a lovely zing. And Sparkles here just learned how to fetch sugar cubes without dissolving them. Ma-am, the rescue leader said slowly, this is a Class 12 death world. We need to evacuate you immediately." Morgan sighed dramatically. "But I just finished installing the hot tub. And you should see what I did with the basement. The acid fall feature really opens up the space." Dr. Plix watched the scene unfold, clutching his research notes. "They don't want to leave. They actually don't want to leave." "Of course not," Captain Zena snorted. "They've got better amenities there than most luxury space stations." The rescue team stood dumbfounded as Morgan gave them a tour of the property, pointing out features like the all-natural acid-filtered air conditioning and the Predator-powered security system. "And this is the garden where I'm breeding new strains of acid-resistant vegetables. Did you know if you cross-pollinate the local toxic flora with standard earth tomatoes, you get the most amazing spicy salsa?" K.O. Rax made his final research note: humans don't just survive. They renovate, redecorate, and apparently gentrify death worlds. After much negotiation, Morgan finally agreed to leave, but only after securing promises about property rights and conservation efforts for their precious babies, referring to the collection of deadly creatures that had somehow become pets. "I'll be back for summer vacation," Morgan called out to their predator family. "Mr. Whiskers, remember to water the plants. Sparkles, no eating the mailman, once we get one." As the rescue ship departed, K.O. Rax turned to his team. "I believe," he said solemnly, "we need to update our understanding of what makes a planet hostile. Because apparently to humans it's just another fixer-upper opportunity." 6 months later, Extreme Home Makeover Deathworld Edition became the highest-rated show in galactic history. Morgan Blake hosted from their renovated compound on Nexus 7, where they'd returned with proper construction permits and a film crew. Today on Deathworld Design, Morgan beamed at the camera, while Mr. Whiskers lounged on a custom-built acid-proof pet bed behind them. "We're turning this lovely volcanic crack into a natural sauna. Remember, folks, just because the atmosphere can melt your bones doesn't mean you can't have a spa day." K.O. Rax's research paper, Human Renovation, a New Paradigm in Xenobiological Adaptation, sparked a revolution in survival studies. His team now ran the prestigious Human Survival Analysis program. Though they spent less time studying survival techniques and more time preventing enthusiastic humans from trying to flip death worlds for profit. "No, you cannot turn a methane swamp into a water park," became Dr. Plix's most frequently used phrase. Captain Zena retired from security to become a real estate agent specializing in challenging properties with potential, though she still refused to drink Morgan's special acid spice tea. The final ratings report showed that the most popular episode featured Morgan teaching Sparkles the World Render how to help with landscaping. The massive creature's gentle use of crystalline horns to trim acid-resistant hedges into perfect shapes had reduced the hive mind collective to tears. As for the betting pool, they stopped taking bets on human survival and started wagering on property values instead. Because, as K.O. Rax noted in his final report, the only thing more dangerous than a human in a death world is a human with renovation plans and a YouTube channel.